thing with him is the blind sheikh lived in the United States for 3 years before he went terrorist. He became part of the fabric of our culture. He went and shopped at our stores. For all intents and purposes, he was a good neighbor. You would never know that when he got the call and that flip switch, that he would start killing Americans. That's a theme that I'm going to try and bring through with these other folks. Now, this is where I went in as far as with Obama wanting to bring the blind sheikh back to Egypt. Okay. Now, 9/11/2001, we all remember that day. 2 airliners flew into the World Trade Center, 2,800 people murdered. Flight 93 the passengers overtook the Al-Qaeda terrorists. Todd Luttrell Beamer, whose father lives up in Jacksonville, and if you should ever get him to speak here, he is a phenomenal individual. All 40 on board died. Then we had the plane flown into the Pentagon, 184 killed, 53 wounded. Now, here's what's interesting. The 19 hijackers at the bottom left, Saudi Arabian for the most part, but that's not the important part. What's important, those 19, they lived here in the United States on average for 2+ years. Their terrorist cell was inactive for 2 years. In that time, they also blended into our society. If you were to meet them on the street, they'd be just like regular guys. You wouldn't know. In fact, one of my relatives lives down in Fort Lauderdale. She shopped at the same store that Muhammad Atta did. She recalled seeing him, and after 9/11, she wouldn't go into a plane for 2 years. But the point is that these guys, they embedded themselves into our culture. Now, they got the call. Obama activated their cell, and then within 48 hours, they're killing thousands of Americans. So how does that happen? What goes on in somebody's mind? Because you think, gosh, they're here in America. We have our freedom and liberty. They have the freedom and liberty here to practice their Islam as they see fit, without any government intervention, nobody watching them. They can go into any mosque, and they can practice their religion freely. Yet, they still flipped. And it goes back to the call that we learned earlier. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. It is a superior religious doctrine. These are the words of God, and when they see the man-made words of our Constitution, on some level, it is offensive to them. And when it becomes offensive is when a follower of Islam invites us to Islam, as bin Laden did with George Bush. He invited America to join the Islamic Ummah, or the Islamic family. George Bush, of course, said no. The press didn't understand the significance of what bin Laden's call to America was. Because once you learn or know that this is the exact word of God, and you reject it, that is what is offensive to the followers of Islam. And that's where Patrick Poole's going to come in. And once you understand that, when he starts going into greater detail about the Muslim Brotherhood and the infiltration of these groups within the United States, hopefully this will click back and you go, okay, now I'm getting it. I hear all this, but now it's starting to make sense, because now I understand why these guys do what they do, and why they don't love our Constitution and Bill of Rights. Now, Professor Matuzitz, he spoke here, a couple months ago? And next week. Well, Jonathan Matuzitz is a great guy. And in one of his lectures that I was at, he quoted the RAND Corporation as identifying that 96% of all worldwide terrorism is Islamic terrorism. That means 4% IRA, whatever groups there are, but 96% of Islamic terrorism worldwide is Islamic. I just find that I find that statistic fascinating. Okay. Now, the Department of Homeland Security refuses to name the enemy. We understand the enemy now. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. If you do not accept that call, then you are offensive to the followers of Islam. You are becoming an adversary because you rejected the word of God. As the followers of Islam see it. Is it starting to click a little bit? Imagine if someone said that they rejected your faith, whatever that may be. You'd look at them and go, it's pretty bold. And who are you to make that judgment call? Well, that judgment call is made when you get the call and you refuse it and don't accept it. That's the psychology. And to bridge that, it's psychological in nature, because when somebody invites you to what they believe is the Word of God and you refuse it, you're offending them. Not personally, they may be the nicest people in the world, but on some level, you're going, well, I don't believe that. I don't believe in your Word of God. On some level, that's offensive. That's the psychological connection. And this is something you're not going to hear everywhere, especially from, I very rarely hear it explained this way, but with Patrick Cumming, I'm able to take a few extra moments and give you the foundational understanding of this psychological connection. Now, in June 2009, Little Rock, Arkansas, a Muslim shoots a local soldier, the guy down on the right, that's Private Long, to death at an Army recruiting center explicitly in the name of Allah. That was his quote that he gave to the paper. He said that at the Army recruiting center that he explicitly did this act in the name of Allah. His name is Abdul Hakim Mujahid Muhammad. He was a recent convert to Islam. That's the man that he killed. He was found guilty. Now, what kind of crime is that? When somebody attacks one of our servicemen and women in uniform, I consider that an act of war. You would think that our government would consider that an act of war as well. Our Department of Homeland Security called this a drive-by shooting. I found that patently offensive. But this isn't the first time. A few months later, Fort Hood, Texas, a Muslim army officer named Major Nadal Hassan, he murdered 13 and wounded 31 unarmed soldiers while yelling, Allahu Akbar. Allah is greatest. Goes back to the original call. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. He also had a business card with the letters SOA on it. That means Soldiers of Allah. Now, if you look at the picture on the left, that's Major Hassan. He was the poster boy, in my opinion, he was the poster boy for Muslims Americanizing and becoming part of our culture. For all intents and purposes, he was a good guy. He was a serviceman. He was rising up through the ranks. He was living the American dream in our military. For all intents and purposes, he was a good guy at that point in his life. But he led a double life. He was, the bottom left, Anwar al-Awlaki. A drone found him, a U.S. drone found him and took him out not too long ago. Major Nadal Hassan was talking frequently with al-Awlaki. And then he snapped and went and started killing our soldiers, yelling Allahu Akbar. Now here's the real Nadal Hassan. See this guy with the beard? That's the same guy over there. That's him. He's on trial now, and he refused to shave his beard. Now, if you notice his beard, that is a Sharia-compliant beard. The book, the Sharia, even tells you how you should wear your beard because you want to be like Muhammad. Muhammad is the greatest of all examples for all mankind. Muhammad had a beard that he could hold within one fist. So Sharia compliant men try to live like Muhammad. So that's what Major Nidal Hasan did. He grew the beard. That is who he is. That's who he wasn't. That's who he appeared. Dual personality. Now, the Department of Homeland Security called this attack, and it wasn't terrorism. If anything should have been terrorism, that should have been it. Now, what Patrick is going to get into is why did they call it workplace violence? Because there are a lot of Muslim Brotherhood operatives that have infiltrated our government. He will name them for you. But now you have a little idea of who the personality of Major Nidal Hasan, and you'll kind of understand a little bit better of why he did what he did because of the call. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. Now, political Islam in Central Florida in March of 2002, Sultana Freeman, Winter Park, Florida. She sued the state of Florida Department of Highway Safety because she wanted to keep her face covered except for her eyes on her driver's license. How many people remember that story? Well, I live 5 miles from there, so I kept close tabs on it. Luckily, she lost her case, but that's not even really the point. The point is that in this book of Sharia, in this book called the Quran, nowhere in there does it say that a Muslim woman must cover her face up to her eyes. It's called a niqab. That is not anywhere in the Islamic doctrine or theology. So was her act, was it political or religious? It's really, that's what the press reported, is that it was a religious, that we were intolerant, that we somehow, we were keeping her from practicing her religious faith as she saw fit. They tried to put guilt onto us. But in reality, that was a political action. Because nowhere in Islamic doctrine and theology does it instruct a woman to have to do that. A lot of women that do this, it's a political statement to say, we are here. Notice us. And it's very subtle. It's not in your face. It's just, we're here. Notice us. Okay.
They claim it religious.
They do. But they're wrong. And my source is Muhammad in the Quran. Not an individual. The individual Muslim, they're not my concern. I only care about Islamic doctrine, theology. My source is Muhammad and the Hadith. Now, in 2011, Imam Abu Tabah in Orlando. How many people heard of this case? Well, this one didn't get as much press. This guy on the bottom left, he is an imam in Orlando. The guy in the middle, Mr. Jimenez, this guy, Marcus Robertson, Imam Tabu, he was training Jimenez by stating it was permissible or obligatory to kill members of the armed forces, specifically generals, and suicide bombings were permissible. Mr. Imam T over there was training this guy to commit terrorism against American servicemen and women overseas. He's in jail on FISA charges, which is good. Now, where the connection is, you remember the blind sheikh? This guy, Imam T, he was a bodyguard for the blind sheikh back in the 90s. That's a clue. Why didn't our government find out who this guy was and keep tabs on him? Well, I think they care. I think the men and women on the ground within our law enforcement, I think they do care, but I think the problem is higher up the food chain. Due to political correctness and multiculturalism, and that's part of what Patrick is going to go into 10 minutes. That's part of what Patrick is going to get into in greater detail. Okay. This trial, 2 imams, the Khan brothers, father, son, family, they were busted for providing material support to the Pakistani Taliban to the tune of $50,000. The Khans they're in jail now, awaiting trial. It's ongoing as we speak. 3 or 4 of the family members, they booked it over to Pakistan, where if the trial goes south, they're going to be untouchable. But that's happening in South Florida. Now, what an imam is equivalent to a priest, a rabbi, or a pastor with a legal degree. Now, an imam is not only a spiritual leader, but he is also an expert on Islamic law and gives legal rulings among the Muslim community when disputes arise. An imam is the community's local leader and the final arbiter whose decisions are grounded in the Sharia Islamiyah or this. And the reason that I bring it up is that how many times have you heard that the terrorists, they're just poor, misguided, misunderstanders of Islam. They don't really know what they're doing. Well, all these examples, and why I had so many, is that 80% of those were imams. They know this, their job is to know Islamic doctrine and theology. So where did this all come from? What's their motivation for doing what they're doing? It goes back to the call. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. And that's the troubling pattern, is that all this happened by legal scholars here in the United States of America. Go. So what does the Islamic doctrine teach us? It teaches us, I'm just going to recap, there is no God but Allah, Muhammad is his messenger, every word of the Quran is the exact word of God down to the last letter. It cannot be changed, altered, or innovated. The Quran is Allah's last and perfect revelation for all mankind, and that includes every one of you. And I'll go ahead and stop. I think I'm running out of time. Okay, all right, you can keep going. So it becomes a cultural problem, and how do we equate this when we all have Muslim friends or neighbors who are hardworking, nice people, good family men? This is where it gets tricky psychologically, because I know many Muslims, and some of them are just the nicest people, good family members, good citizens, good neighbors, and nice people. They may be Muslims in name only. They may not be hardcore. But we don't know that.
Can't they just flip?
They can, as we all can. That's why I try not to judge the individual. It is not about the individual, it's about the doctrine and theology. Now, that's why it's about politics. And Dr. Zuhdi Jasser is a great example of that, because he wants to separate the political from the religious. Will he be successful? I don't know. But a lot of people on our side don't. But I agree with him wanting to take all the bad stuff out of Sharia law, separating it. And I follow him on that. Do I agree with everything? No, absolutely not. Okay. Now the Sharia, I've already gone into this, and I think we're running out of time. But the bottom line, the one thing that I want you to remember, this book, next time you see it, it's going to have a little new meaning. Muslims believe this is the exact word of God. To the Archangel Gabriel, to Muhammad, it supersedes our Constitution and Bill of Rights. And that's what motivates me to be here. And I believe that's what motivates each and every one of you in this room, is the love of the Constitution and the love of Bill of Rights and the love of this country. I believe that the political Islamic doctrine, as we've seen by the examples and the violence committed here in America, is a threat to our Constitution. Can there be coexistence? No, it's a competing Islamic doctrine. You'll see billboards around Central Florida that says the 3 Abrahamic faiths, Muhammad, Jesus, and Moses, are all equal. Now you know that they are not. Because now you know that the imams believe This is the Word of God. It supersedes everything and is a superior political doctrine. So when Patrick Poole comes in February, he's going to get into the Muslim Brotherhood, and he's going to get into the infiltration, but now you have a better idea of the psychology and the basic foundational structure. And basically what makes the Muslim mind work. And one last thing is, the other question that everybody asks me is, how can somebody blow themselves up, wrap a vest around them, and blow themselves up? That is the one question that I hear a lot, and I can answer it in 2 minutes. Because this is the Word of God, for a devout Muslim, their life goal, why they live their life, is to get to paradise, or to Jannah, as they call it. Now, there's only one sure way to get to Jannah, and that's through jihad, spilling your blood to advance Islam. And the other fact that most people are not aware of is that when a terrorist blows himself up, when he gets to paradise, he will be able to intercede for 75 of his family members. What that means is that 75 of his family members will also be able to go into paradise. Doesn't matter what they did. That makes that individual a hero among his family, makes him a hero among his community, and makes a mother, in many cases, encourage their sons to fight jihad and to give their life for the advancement of Islam. Knock on wood, we haven't seen too much of that here in the United States as of yet, but all things